What's up, everybody? George and Max. We are here talking about Black Panther. We're going through every single MCU project leading up to Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, which comes out May 6th. Welcome back to the Rewatch. All right, George, start us off. Black Panther, what are we talking about?
There is a reason why this film is the only MCU project to be nominated for the Academy Award for Best Picture. It's a great, fantastic, phenomenal, outstanding, tremendous film. Ryan Coogler brings Wakanda to life in such a great way. And I'm going to try to mix up my adjectives that I use for this film so I'm not overusing. Great, awesome, fantastic. But those really are the best words to describe Black Panther. The visuals of Wakanda are stunning. The score by Ludwig Göransson, who also did the score for The Mandalorian, which is one of my favorite TV scores. He's fantastic with this. And then just the bottom line is Chadwick Boseman as T'Challa is probably, if not the best performance by an actor in the MCU. You know, Tom Hiddleston has a claim to that, and one would argue Robert Downey Jr. has a claim to that. There are arguments to be made for others, but Chadwick Boseman gave 100% to T'Challa over the course of his appearances in the MCU, whether that was as a supporting character in Civil War or at the forefront here in Black Panther. He is one of my favorite actors of all time. We talked about this when we did the Civil War episode, but I'm devastated that we won't be able to see more of his performances in the MCU, but also just in cinema, because he's one of the best talents I've ever seen. And that really shows in this film. Just the weight he brings to the role, the strength, the gravitas, the humor. He's able to mix so many different emotions and personal character motivations and choices into his portrayal of this character that, you know, he has to be the main topic of conversation for any discussion about the film. And that isn't to say the rest of the cast isn't great, because Lupita Nyong'o is fantastic. Denai Guerrera, Letitia Wright, Michael B. Jordan, one of the best villain performances we've had thus far. The list goes on and on. Daniel Kaluuya is awesome in this. Forrest Whitaker. I could keep going, but I think I've made my point. This film is awesome.
You won't find any arguments on that front from me.
Nor would I expect any.
Yeah, I mean, it's a spectacular film, and it's not just because of the direction of Ryan Coogler, the cinematography, the acting from, honestly, all of the actors who, you know, really had great chemistry and I think meshed really well, because there was great humor, but also tackling the very real issues that they were facing. And I think one thing that stands out to me when I think back on this film that, you know, aside from Chadwick Boseman delivering, like you said, a top-notch performance, as he always does, is the real sort of geopolitical conflict that seeps its way into the storyline, right? It's very subtle at first and not quite present until we're really introduced to Killmonger. He's really the instigator for that, and I think is a perfect segue into some very real conversations that we're having right now in our own real world, in our own, you know, lives. And it's hard for me to say that Killmonger was wrong. I mean, obviously his methods are not ones that I would condone, but I think he raises a lot of really interesting points that are nuanced in the argument that we have all of these resources, why not share them? And then the counter argument that the Wakandans bring up, or at least Chadwick Boseman and his allies bring up, is just because we've been mistreated in the past, our people around the world have been mistreated in the past, doesn't mean that we have to resort to dominating the world. We don't have to take over the world. We can use these tools, our technology, for good. There is another way. And so they're really great foils in that sense, that they have, I think, similar goals. Killmonger brought those goals out of T'Challa in ways that he probably wouldn't have expected. And I think that's part of the brilliance of this film.
Yeah, and I think what you say about the two of them as foils, and what you say about Killmonger not entirely being wrong or in the wrong in this film is really poignant, because it's one of the few examples, and the Falcon and the Winter Soldier is another example here, but it's one of the few examples of the we'll call him a villain of the film, because Killmonger is the villain of the film, changing the point of view of the hero. And at the end of the film, T'Challa and the Wakandan people open up their resources to the world. Right? There's a new outreach center that Shuri's going to lead the technological outreach. You know, you get into Infinity War, which takes place 2 years later, where they're literally welcoming the Avengers in for this fight against Thanos, and they're providing the resources to help Vision get the stone out of his head. You know, this perspective that Killmonger shares is not, I think you put it really, really well, it's not executed in the best way. His motivations may be a little bit flawed, but the concept and idea that he brings is something that T'Challa obviously takes very seriously, and then considers in his leadership now that he's king.
Yeah, and I think that's the mark of a really well-written character too, both on the side of Killmonger
for each of them.
and and T'Challa, right? Is that they both work against each other, but they also pull each other in really interesting ways that change the other one, I think. And as an audience member, it's really easy to get drawn into a film like that, where it's not cut and dry, where, okay, we know there's a good guy, we know there's a bad guy, and we know the bad guy's going to do horrible things to try and beat up the bad guy, beat the good guy and the good guy's allies. But this is very different in
this isn't
that it's
Iron Man 2. This is very nuanced.
It's very nuanced, and I mean that brings weight to it. I think we can jump into some rankings and ratings. I know we're going to be pretty close. This is going to be near the top of both of our lists. But George, why don't you start us off?
Yeah. So again, the flaws in this film are very, very few and far between. The CGI on the battle rhinos is probably up there, even though they're really, really cool. Again, you're giving a voice to actors and creators and directors and people of color in a superhero context. You're giving them this space to make their voices heard, but also for younger people to connect with seeing someone like themselves on the screen, which is huge. And I think that's a big part of this film's legacy. So I'm going to throw it in my top 5. It is number 5 out of 32. And it's going to match the score of the film above and below Black Panther in my overall rating. And I'm going to throw it at the bottom of that A+ range, 97.
That's a great rating. And, to your point, George, on the issue of race and representation, I think that's a whole nother episode, right? I think if we started talking about the amazing things that Black Panther has done to promote representation in Hollywood, even in its own small way, I think is not insignificant to the creators and the people that brought this film to life. And it's nice to see big budget films doing this, like Marvel, and continuing to do this, but obviously a lot more work to be done. And I think, we would get way off track and we could talk about that for hours for good reason, and could cover a lot of ground. But I'll go into my ratings and rankings. I'm also going to put it in my top 5. It'll be one spot higher than George's. I'm at 4 out of 32 projects. But interestingly enough, I will give it a slightly lower rating. I'm giving it a 95.
It's the Battle Rhinos, isn't it?
No, I think it has nothing to do with the faults of the film that would take away from its score. It's just I think it is a very, very good film, but I think there are 3 films that are better and I can rate higher. So we'll see where those end up in the coming days, not even really weeks. So with that, that's going to do it for us tonight for the rewatch. We just talked about Black Panther. Tomorrow, we got one of the big ones, Infinity War. George is hosting, so come check us out tomorrow night, and we'll see you later. Good night.